John has been a zookeeper for years, devoted to the seals in his care, especially a newborn seal pup he'd grown particularly fond of. One day, this baby seal started showing unusual signs, behaving oddly and appearing to shed tears, which alarmed John deeply. He reported the behavior to his supervisor, who decided to review the CCTV footage for any clues to the pup's condition. However, what the footage revealed led to an outcome John never anticipated: his immediate dismissal. "What do you mean I'm fired?" John confusedly asked his boss. "I'm sorry, John. You gave me no other choice," his boss said as he folded his hands together. He had just watched the CCTV footage of the baby seal's enclosure after John had urged him to. "You have the rest of the day to pack your things and leave." John couldn't believe it. All he had wanted was to find out why the seal had been acting so distressed, and now he was the one getting fired. While his boss was in a meeting, John sneaked into his office to look at the footage himself. When he finally saw what had been happening in the baby seal's enclosure, his eyes grew wide with shock. This had to stop, and John was going to make that happen. But why did his boss fire John? What did they see in the footage? And what had happened to the baby seal? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The local zoo was a social hub for many families. Everyone loved going there, but most of them only came for the seals. Every day around 12, they would put on a little mealtime show for the visitors, showing off their jumping skills and waving at the children standing front row. John was the show master, having taught the seals almost all their tricks. They trusted John and knew he would never do anything to harm them. But one Wednesday morning, while getting ready for the show, John noticed something wasn't right with the youngest baby seal. It was acting distressed, and there were even real tears rolling down its little cheek. Not knowing what had caused this behavior, John quickly went over to one of his colleagues, Susan, who had cared for the seals the day before. However, his colleague also had no idea. She even told him the baby seal had acted like that yesterday as well. John was baffled. Something must have happened on Tuesday while he wasn't working. John felt very responsible for the seal's well-being, so he wanted to get to the bottom of this. Whoever did something wrong that day would never confess out of their own free will, so John thought of another way to find out the truth. He had to look at the CCTV footage. There was one minor hiccup though. Zoo workers weren't usually allowed to look back at any CCTV footage they liked. John went to his boss, hoping he would have a look at the footage himself. John's boss wasn't convinced at first, but after John described how important the well-being of the seals was to the zoo and how the zoo could lose a lot of profit if one of those seals were to upset the visitors, he agreed to watch the footage anyway. John, however, wasn't allowed to stay in the room, so he got back to work. The rest of the day, John waited to hear back from his boss. The feeding show went great, and all the visitors cheered as John made the big seals clap their flippers and jump off a plank. But all John could think about was the sad little baby seal. Again, at the end of the day, John decided he had waited long enough. His boss must have checked the footage by now, so he walked up to his office and knocked on the door. When the door opened, John could see his boss was a bit surprised to see him. "Ah, John, I've been wanting to speak to you," he said a bit hesitantly. "Again, have you checked the footage?" John asked hopefully. Yes, his boss began. "What is it, boss?" John worriedly asked. "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go," his boss eventually said. John was stunned. "What do you mean?" he asked, a little taken aback. His boss sighed. "You have until tomorrow to get your things." It was like being punched in the stomach. John stood in silence, trying to comprehend what had just happened. "I'm fired," he eventually managed to say. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain," he said, voice steady but his heart racing. His boss, caught off guard, hesitated but stood firm. "John, you need to leave now," he said, his voice betraying a hint of regret. But John wasn't moving. This wasn't just about his job, it was about the animals he loved. "Why am I being fired?" John pressed, his voice rising in frustration. His boss looked away, avoiding eye contact. "I can't discuss it, John." As the standoff was broken when his boss picked up the phone and called security. Within minutes, a security guard entered, a look of surprise on his face upon seeing who he was supposed to escort out. "John, let's go," the guard said, his voice sympathetic but firm. As John glanced once more at his boss, hoping for a last-minute reprieve, but there was none. It was time to go. As John cleared out his locker, the security guard watched in silence. "Tell him he's making a big mistake," John said, handing over his zookeeper uniform. The guard nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. Walking out of the zoo gates, John looked back at the enclosures, his determination hardening. As he walked away, John was already plotting his next move. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. This story was far from over. That evening, John sat on his couch, racking his brain for ways to reclaim his job. He needed something solid, irrefutable. Throughout the night, John sketched out a bold strategy. The plan was to catch the real cause of the baby seal's distress on camera. So, as the first light of dawn broke, John was already on his way back to the zoo. He kept a low profile, hoping to slip inside unnoticed and set his plan into motion. Gathering his courage, John made his move towards the gate as soon as his boss disappeared from sight. But the moment he swiped his keycard, the red light blinked mockingly back at him. Denied access, the reality of his situation sank in. Standing there, mix of frustration and helplessness washing over him, he knew he needed another way in. And why are you here? Susan asked, her forehead creasing with worry. John scrambled for a believable excuse. So I just forgot some stuff at my desk, he lied, trying to sound casual. And mentioned Susan eyed him for a moment, then, seemingly convinced, offered to let him in. Susan looked at him, expecting him to lead the way to his former workspace. John knew he had to act fast. His real mission had nothing to do with forgotten items at a desk. Needing to part ways with Susan without arousing suspicion was John's next challenge. Thinking quickly, he muttered, "Actually, I need to hit the bathroom first." Before Susan could offer to wait, John darted off, leaving her in the hallway. John rushed into the bathroom, locking himself in a stall to buy some time. And he knew his boss's schedule well enough to remember a standing meeting at 10. If he could just stay hidden until then, he'd have a better chance to move around unnoticed. John waited in the bathroom, checking his watch every few minutes. The seconds ticked by slowly, each one amplifying his anxiety. He kept listening for the sounds of the zoo to quiet down, a sign that his boss and others might be heading to the meeting. When the clock finally struck 10, John cautiously opened the bathroom door and peeked out. The coast seemed clear. He made a beeline for his boss's office, avoiding eye contact with anyone. John arrived at his boss's office, his breath short and quick. To his dismay, it was locked. Standing there, he realized he hadn't planned for this. As John was debating his next move, the unmistakable sound of his boss's voice floated down the hallway, getting closer by the second. In a split-second decision, John dove behind a large filing cabinet, his heart pounding in his chest. The door swung open and John's boss stepped inside, moving with purpose. He seemed preoccupied, barely glancing around as he grabbed a few documents from his desk. And in his hurry, John's boss dashed out of the office, leaving the door ajar. He had forgotten to lock it behind him. A rare mistake, but fortunate for John. John quickly but cautiously made his way into the office, closing the door softly behind him. Once secluded, John began his urgent search through the office, looking for anything that might help him understand what had happened and, more importantly, prove his innocence. Boss's computer, John quickly stumbled upon a video file marked classified CCTV footage seal enclosure. His pulse quickened as he clicked on the file. John hit play on the video, keeping the sound off to avoid drawing attention. As the footage rolled, his eyes widened in disbelief. John knew he needed to share this with his colleagues somehow. With the coast clear, John stepped out, the recorded conversation heavy on his mind. As John navigated the now familiar corridors of the zoo, his mind raced with the implications of his discovery. Then, suddenly, voice cut through his thoughts. The dim light revealed it was Susan, her face etched with seriousness and concern. Inside the cramped space, Susan looked John straight in the eyes. "I know why you're really here, John," she said, her voice steady. Susan listened intently, her resolve hardening as the story unfolded. After hearing John's story, Susan's expression softened into one of determination. "I want to help," she said without hesitation. Together, in hushed tones, they began to craft a plan, a way to expose the truth without causing unnecessary harm to the zoo or the animals they both cherished. With a plan in place, John left the zoo, his spirits lifted slightly by Susan's commitment to their cause. Back at the zoo, Susan received John's email, containing both the video of the glaciers, the seal enclosure, and the audio recording of their boss's incriminating conversation. With a deep breath, G forwarded the email to all their colleagues, excluding their boss. It was a bold move, one that could change everything. As Susan observed the ripple effect of the email through the workspace, she could barely contain her anticipation. Colleagues huddled in small groups, their expressions a mix of shock and resolve. Soon, Susan's desk became the epicenter of an impromptu meeting. Colleagues bombarded her with questions, their voices a blend of curiosity and outrage. The sudden appearance of their boss passing by sent a wave of silence across the room. Eyes darted towards him, laden with unspoken accusations and anger. The boss, puzzled by the cold reception, hurried into his sanctuary, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. As expected, the call came. "Susan, he wants to see you in his office," relayed a colleague, a mix of concern and anticipation in their eyes. But with a deep breath, she walked towards the office, ready to unveil the truth. In the quiet of the office, Susan played the footage for her boss, showing him clearly upsetting the baby seal by kicking its food away and throwing its play ball out of reach. His actions on the screen spoke louder than any words could. The boss watched, his face a mask of surprise and discomfort, as his casual cruelty was laid bare for both of them to see. But the boss, caught in the act, scrambled for an explanation. "I was just playing," he stammered, attempting to brush off his actions as harmless fun. Without missing a beat, Susan played the audio recording of his phone conversation, discussing plans to silence John. The evidence was undeniable. He had been caught, exposed for all he was, and there was no way out. In that moment, he knew everything he had built was crumbling around him. Susan, standing firm, laid out her terms. "Next, the footage gets deleted, you rehire John and resign immediately after," she stated, her voice steady and uncompromising. It was a simple choice: accept responsibility and step down, or face the consequences of his actions becoming public. Susan left no room for negotiation, her stance clear and her demand for justice unwavering. In a move that shocked the entire staff, their boss upheld his end of the deal and resigned by the week's end. The announcement came suddenly, a swift turn of events that left the zoo buzzing with whispers and relief. His departure marked the end of a tense chapter for everyone involved, paving the way for a fresh start and a hopeful future for the zoo and its residents. With the previous boss's exit, John was quickly brought back to the zoo, his position and dignity restored. His colleagues welcomed him with open arms, celebrating the return of a beloved friend and a passionate caretaker. Pity upon John's return, the baby seal's spirits lifted noticeably, its behavior a stark contrast to the distress it had shown. The seal frolicked and played, its eyes brighter and its energy unmatched, clearly rejoicing in John's presence. The arrival of the new boss brought a wave of positive change. She was a figure of warmth and authority, her vision for the zoo aligned with the well-being of its inhabitants and the satisfaction of a Gyuzhou. Her leadership style was inclusive and forward-thinking, inspiring confidence and loyalty from the get-go. Under her guidance, the zoo began to thrive in ways it hadn't before, promising a brighter future for everyone involved.